Let's continue our discussion of the fundamentals of pistol marksmanship with now pivoting into breath control. We've already covered the fundamentals of stance, grip, and aiming. Now we're going to talk about when controlling your breathing matters, when it does not, and I'll share with you 3 techniques that you can use to help mitigate the rise and fall of the chest as you're finishing off the shot process. In previous sessions, we've also touched upon the body's natural stress response, how the sympathetic nervous system kicks in to prepare you for those stressful events. As that relates to breathing, we tend to pre-oxygenate or sometimes over-oxygenate, and our breathing can get in the way of taking a good solid shot, especially when accuracy is needed. So in this session, we're also going to touch upon the parasympathetic nervous system and how that tends to counterbalance the stress response, how we can trigger that parasympathetic response in order to lower our heart rate, reduce that anxiety going into that stressful encounter. Breathing is a natural process where the diaphragm triggers the muscles in the chest wall to expand, causing a negative pressure system within the lungs. We draw in air as the chest wall expands. There's a transfer of oxygen from the air we breathe through the membrane of the lungs into the bloodstream. And at the same time, there's an exchange of carbon dioxide, the CO2 that the body is producing, is now going into the lungs. So when we exhale, we're exhaling that CO2. The lungs are taking in oxygen to the bloodstream and then removing the CO2 out of the bloodstream. If we have a lack of O2 or a surplus of CO2, if we have too little oxygen or too much carbon dioxide in the bloodstream, then it starts to trigger some physiological responses within the body. As it relates to shooting, the 2 primary ones, you will have a little bit of vision degradation as there's not enough O2 going to the retina. And then the other thing is you may experience a little bit of muscle tremors. The third little annoyance that you may encounter is a little bit of anxiety creeping in. You may not actually recognize it as such. Imagine if you're holding your breath, swimming underwater, and you held your breath just a little bit longer than what is comfortable. That little bit of starving for oxygen as you want to surface to take that next deep breath. So those are the things that we need to guard against, so we cannot hold our breath for too long, so we don't trigger those natural responses from lack of O2. Now, the main reason we're holding our breath momentarily or controlling our breathing while shooting is to minimize the arc of movement up and down on the target because the shoulders are attached to the torso. So when the lungs expand, the shoulders go up a little bit, and when the chest wall contracts or you expel that air, then the shoulders will rest back down at their natural point of aim. The trick here is we need to control our breathing so that we're holding our breath momentarily so that it steadies the shot at a natural point of aim, but we're not holding the breath so long as to trigger those natural stress responses of blurry vision, muscle tremors, or that little bit of anxiety that may creep in. So there's 3 techniques that I'll share with you for controlling your breathing. All 3 of these techniques rely on the concept of you're going to stop breathing momentarily to steady your aim while you take the shot. The chief difference in these 3 techniques is when you're going to stop breathing. With that natural cycle of breathing, our chest wall expands, we take in air, it collapses, we exhale that air. There's a natural pause between respirations of about 2 or 3 seconds for most people. So the first technique we're going to talk about is natural respiratory pause. You're going to breathe as normal. And when you exhale, in that natural pause of 2 or 3 seconds between breaths, you're going to smoothly finish off the shot process. So with the natural respiratory pause technique, you're just going to breathe naturally, breathe in, breathe out. When you hit that natural pause between breaths, that 2 or 3 seconds, you're going to smoothly finish off the trigger squeeze, do your follow through, and then continue breathing as normal. The second technique is very similar to the first. This one we're going to call exhale, half, and hold. We're still capitalizing on a 2 or 3 second pause in the breathing cycle, but here, instead of doing it at the natural pause between breaths, you're going to take a deep breath, exhale about half, hold it momentarily, still only for 2 or 3 seconds, smoothly finish off the shot, conduct your follow through, and then continue breathing. So both those techniques are identical, minus where you're conducting that pause. Technique 1, the natural respiratory pause, is between your natural breaths. With the exhale, half, and hold, it's the same concept, except you're controlling and being a little bit more deliberate as opposed to just falling into your natural breath cycle. The third technique I'll share with you is what I call on demand. It's very similar to the other two techniques in as much as we're going to stop breathing, but here it's not dependent on between your natural breaths or exhaling half and holding. When you feel your sights are ready and you're ready to commit to taking that shot, just stop breathing, smoothly finish off the pressure on the trigger, take the shot, and then continue breathing as normal. Those are the three techniques for when we need to minimize the arc of movement. For any of these techniques, I only want you to hold your breath for no longer than 2 or 3 seconds before finishing the shot process. After about that 3 or 4 second mark, most people will experience those stress responses we discussed already. This will depend on your cardio endurance. The better cardio health you have, the longer you can hold your breath without triggering this response because your body is accustomed to using the O2 more efficiently. So keep in mind that the preceding fundamentals we've discussed, stance, grip, and aiming, you can take as much time as necessary to make sure those are solid. Once we hit the breath control fundamental, from there through trigger squeeze and follow through, you've got about 2 or 3 seconds of holding your breath to finish off the shot cycle to complete that round going off. If you have not taken the shot within that 2 or 3 seconds, that is okay. Take a deep breath, let it out, continue from the beginning. When you're ready to take that shot, hold your breath, smoothly finish off the trigger. Let's talk quickly about when we need to apply the principles of breath control and when it really doesn't matter. During the initial building block stages of learning how to shoot, or if you've been shooting and now you're trying to refine your fundamentals, then I want you to apply solid breath control. This will help to minimize the vertical dispersion of your rounds on target because you have stopped breathing momentarily while you take that shot. It'll help you or your shooting coach to better identify and isolate any vertical dispersion. Is that an issue with grip pressures or tensing up your grip strength at the last minute? Or is it a sight alignment issue? If you are continuing to breathe while taking the shot, that further compounds the issue and muddies the waters because now you have to isolate what is causing that vertical dispersion. For example, with this target here at 3 yards, when I hold my breath and I'm using proper fundamentals, I can nail that 3/4 inch little dot that's on the target. If I am breathing when I take the shot, at the height of that cycle of breathing, when my lungs are at full capacity, you'll note that the round impacts about 3 or 4 inches high. This is at 3 yards, so you can imagine that as the distance increases, that angular spread on the target is going to magnify. The error stays constant, the distance increases, therefore the error on target is going to be greater. The same thing goes for taking a distance shot, or if it's a low percentage target, meaning defensively you have a very small target to aim at, then you want to incorporate the fundamental breath control to help isolate that movement so you can maximize the ability of hitting that shot. Now, the times when breath control is much less of a factor is if we're very close to the target and our level of accuracy is not requiring pinpoint shots on target. If you're shooting defensively, then it's less critical to isolate your breathing because the margin of error for defensive type of accuracy is a little bit bigger. You're not trying to hit a bullseye. You're trying to keep it within, say, a 4 or 6 inch group, depending on what you're trying to do in the distance you're at. For my students, the defensive level of accuracy that I strive for is keeping it within a 6 inch group. This is not a slow aim fire 6 inch group. This is a rapid string of fire, getting multiple rounds into a 6 inch group. That is good for defensive level of accuracy. When you're shooting up close and personal, the amount of deviation from you continuing to breathe is going to be within that 6 inch margin of error. So breath control is less critical if we're up close for defensive level accuracy. If we're having to take a distance shot, or if there's a low percentage target where there's only a small portion visible, then of course we need to revert back to incorporating the fundamental of breath control. In the beginning, I mentioned that there's a technique we can use to rein in that sympathetic nervous system or the body's stress response. We're going to use what's called combat breathing. It's also referred to as tactical breathing, or in some esoteric meditative type circles, they call it box breathing. We're going to breathe in through the nose for 4 seconds. Breathing in through the nose helps to warm and humidify the air before it hits the lungs. We're going to breathe in through the nose for 4 seconds, hold the breath for 4 seconds, and then exhale for 4 seconds. Once we've exhaled at that 4-second mark, we're going to pause for 4 seconds before repeating the cycle. So we're going to breathe in, hold it, breathe out, pause, breathe in, hold it, breathe out, pause. Repeat that for 3 or 4 or 5 times, and you will find that your anxiety starts to melt away. You have better focus. You can apply this whether you're a beginner level shooter having that anxiety before stepping up there to take your first shots, if you're a competitor or tactical type shooter before you do the thing that you're doing. All right. Hopefully that was helpful. If you're enjoying this series on the fundamentals, do me a favor, make sure you're subscribed, give it a thumbs up, but most importantly, hit that share button or copy the link to the playlist you'll find down below. Send that to those in your community. Get the word out on how to apply the fundamentals correctly. Next up over here, we're going to be talking about the fundamental of trigger control so we don't screw up that nice sight alignment and sight picture we did in the previous step, and we're executing the rest of the fundamentals within that 2 to 3 second respiratory pause. If you have time for that, I'll see you over there, and if not, as always, God bless you and stay safe.